Greetings, YouTube. So I found myself thinking about how many Americans seem to have a fundamental inability to grasp what the scientific method is. People love certainty, and I appreciate that. I am someone that does also like certainty. The older I get, the more I come to realize that certainty is a difficult thing to pin down, if you'll pardon the pun, because life is complex. And the only thing in life that you can truly count on is change. And that makes a lot of people really uncomfortable. So when researchers come out and say, hey, we've found this, we've got this new theory that invalidates that old theory, a lot of people hear that as a debunking of the scientific method, even though that is the actual scientific method. If you postulate something and someone else comes along and goes, that's wrong, here's something better. Now, they may have gotten that here's something better out of the remains of the thing that was just proven to be wrong. They took out the parts that were good, and they used those good bits to help them come up with the better theory. And if that theory persists long enough, sometimes we'll call it, a law of nature or something, but the reality is that it's all just a theory. And at any point in time, it's going to become disproven by somebody who will replace it with something better. Now, in some cases, those time spans are getting longer and longer, and who knows if any of us will ever see some truly revolutionary changes in like some of the fundamentals of physics. I mean, I'm talking about the lay people. I understand that there are researchers out there right now that are crunching things that I will never comprehend, and I'm woefully out of the loop when it comes to physics. I mean, the last thing I heard about quantum mechanics was like and cosmology and things like that. They were talking about like the M theory, and I'm sure that M theory is woefully out of date. At the time, the last thing I heard, they were debating whether there were 11 or 14 dimensions. So, like I said, I'm completely out of the loop on that. It was one of my hyperfixations for a bit, and eventually I got moved on to a new hyperfixation. That's kind of what it's like being autistic. But when a new theory comes along and is better than the old theory, remember we used to think that heat was transferred by an actual fluid moving from object to object through the ether. Yeah, that didn't stand up for long. People didn't know that heat can be transferred through radiation just in a room that moving from one hot spot to a cold spot, because that's just what happens. They didn't know that it could be transferred by conductivity, just a warm object on a cold object, or convection. A fan is a wonderful example of convection. It's moving air past an object, which is going to help move heat away from that object. Um, Not everyone knew that. Now, of course, we had some colloquial information. Air blowing on me makes me cooler, but they didn't necessarily know that the reasons for it, because some of that was evaporation of sweat, and some of that was, again, convection. Um, but it didn't mean that nobody knew. And when somebody was able to pin words to it and say, this is what it's called, we've figured it out, here's the math that shows you how it works if you want to look at it, that was just better than the old methods of looking at it. And that's the beautiful thing about science. Each new idea can be better than the last one. And occasionally people throw up ideas that are absolute crap. They may at first blush look good, but then people take it out for a test drive, they kick the tires, and they realize, this thing does not work. You're presenting us with an Edsel. This is not what we need. And again, sometimes you can take parts of a bad idea and use them in a good idea. That doesn't invalidate the very concept of the scientific method. But science is all about change and growth and evolution, and that terrifies a lot of people because they want certainty. And certainty doesn't really exist in science. And that terrifies some folks. And because they feel they're constantly being barraged by new information, whether that is true or not, doesn't really matter. It's how they feel. They have this concept that their feelings are more important than the scientific method itself. That this makes me feel uncomfortable, so it must be wrong because it makes me feel uncomfortable. No, it just makes you feel uncomfortable. Maybe if you had a better understanding of what it does and how it works, you'd feel less uncomfortable. I don't feel uncomfortable about the scientific method. I understand that it's constantly evolving. I also don't mind that there's mysteries in the universe. There are things that we currently don't know. The idea that there's stuff out there that we haven't gotten to yet, I find quite endearing. It makes me smile. The knowledge that there is undiscovered territories that we still can get into, and we can still pick apart, and we can create new maps, and we can go into new directions, and that's awesome. It's not terrifying for me. I am a devout lover of data and science. I have been my whole life. I've been trying to figure out how stuff works for my whole existence, and part of that is because I'm autistic. Because I'm trying to figure out how people work, and I still haven't figured that one out. But in the process, I did acquire a love and for the process of looking at something, taking it apart, and trying to figure out what's below the surface. And that's why I read so much science, and I read history and things like that, because it fascinates me. I want to know what's behind that curtain. You know what I mean? And that I still haven't figured out people, I'll keep working on that. But it does mean that I'm very comfortable with science, and many Americans are not. And that is sad to me, and it's terrifying because they're raising kids in households that don't celebrate science. And I know people who are raising kids in households that don't have books in them, which is terrifying. But they're bringing that fear to school boards. They're voting things down. They're getting elected. They're damaging the very education system that we so desperately need to keep working so we can have a better future. If you look around the world today and you see problems and you think to yourself, these problems were caused by science, I can absolutely promise you that ignorance is not going to solve any of them.